Earlier this spring, I was camping in the woods 4 hours north of where I live. There was a small lake that I'd go to a lot. It was never crowded or even really known about, I don't think, so it made for a nice peaceful getaway every time I went. When I got there on the first day and set everything up, nobody else was there. The lake wasn't too big and was surrounded by a grassy beach with the woods around it, so I could see pretty much all around the lake. Not too long after I arrived, I saw a man come out of the woods on the other side and set up a tent. He looked like an average camper and was keeping to himself for the first little while. Before sundown, though, I saw him making his way around the lake and over toward my campsite. He had a friendly smile and introduced himself as William. He said he wasn't sure if I saw him set up camp or not, but he saw me across the lake and just wanted to say hi since we were both out in the middle of nowhere at a lake that nobody usually comes to. We talked for a while, and he was really cool actually. William was 26, which was around the same age as me, and we both liked this camping spot because of how secluded it was. After talking for 30 minutes, he went back to the other side of the lake as the sun was coming down. Not much else happened that night, but in the morning, we ended up talking and hanging out for most of the day. He shared a 6-pack of beers with me, and we sat on the beach and had some good casual conversations. When we went back to our tents at the end of the day, I was sitting by my small campfire and was really happy I'd met William. He seemed like the perfect buddy to go camping with, maybe some other time. As it got later though, I started getting ready to stomp out the fire and go to bed when I saw William walking around the lake. His campfire had gone out a while ago, so I thought he was in his tent already sleeping, but apparently not. He walked up to my campfire, and right away, something was different about him. "Hey, everything good, man?" I said. He smiled and was suddenly back to how he was before, but he said he came over to ask if I wanted to see a cool spot he found that had a great view. I said it was kind of late to be going out, but he assured me that the view was great because it was dark out. The way he was hyping it up made me feel like I couldn't not see it. And what would be the point in camping out in the woods if I just passed up the good views? I got up and followed him to the other side of the lake, then trailed behind him as he led us through the woods. There was no path or anything, so I pretty quickly knew that whatever spot this was, William had to have been there many times before to know the exact way without getting lost, especially out in the dark. We walked for maybe 15 minutes before William started slowing down. He pointed ahead and smiled like this was the view, but when I walked in front of him and looked out, there was a small structure. It was an old RV or camper that looked like it had been abandoned and succumbed to the elements for years. Moss grew all over it, and holes of rust covered the siding. I turned back to look at William, wondering what this was, but his face was now cold and empty. He looked like he was a different person. "William, what is this?" He didn't answer. Feeling a rush of fear, I started frantically looking around, and that's when I heard the rusty metal door swing open behind me. I only saw for a quick second as someone else came running out before I started sprinting away. I could hear both William and the other person following close behind, but I gave my every strength to keep going until I lost them. By then, I'd run so far into the woods that I had no idea where I was. I just kept walking and keeping my eyes on the trees until the sun came up. By the time I found my way back to the lake, I saw from the tree line that all of my camping gear was gone. It looked as if I was never even there. I stayed hidden and got back on the trail, making it back to my car. I made a report with the local police, but they never mentioned finding anything. I don't think they even really looked, to be honest. What was planned for me that night is horrifying to think about, but at least I got out before having to witness it firsthand. I was backpacking through a route I'd found in the Cascades National Park. It was an out-and-back trail that typically takes 3 days one way and 3 days back. I didn't know too much about it, or how popular of a trail it was, but when doing these long backpacking routes, it usually doesn't matter, because you'll most likely not run into many people anyway. On my 3rd day out though, I passed by one of the campsites and saw a man sitting by his tent. I took a break and we talked for a bit, where he mentioned he was staying there for the night and heading to the peak of the trail on the following day. I told him that that's where I was heading today, and that I'll probably see him when he gets there. I left shortly after, and got to what would be my campsite for the next 2 nights. The view was something I'd never experienced before, and made for a great rest day and peak of the trail. For that whole day, nobody passed through, and when it came to night, I was still the only one camping there. I thought back to that guy I'd met at the campsite a day behind me, who said he'd be reaching this trail peak on this day. He never showed up though. I thought he maybe decided to turn around for some reason, or just camp out for another day at the place he was already at. In the morning, I packed up and started back down the way I came, though I got a late start, so at the very least, I was hoping to make it to that same campsite the man was at. I was really sore for some reason too, which didn't help, and before I knew it, there was almost no daylight left. I put on my headlamp and continued on the trail, walking for another hour past sundown before I made it to the camp. The tent that the man had was still there, set up like he never left. Knowing his plans to continue hiking, and just knowing that staying at one camp for several days while backpacking is unusual, I called out, asking if he was okay. There was no response. I walked up a bit closer and said I just wanted to check in on him, but the flap on his tent was partially open and nobody was inside. I felt a lump in my throat, like my body knew something wasn't right. I stood and looked all around, not seeing a single sign of him anywhere, until I saw a glimmer in the distance. There was a faint light sitting still far out in the woods. I began walking up to it, going about 40 yards from the tents, before I found the source. It was a headlamp laying on the ground like it had been accidentally left behind, and the light was so dim that it must have been nearly out of batteries. And it was just then that I noticed someone watching me. They were standing not too far, just 10 yards away, and clearly trying to not be seen. I knew in my gut that this wasn't the man from before, but I felt like I had to say or do something.
Hello? Do you need help?
They stood still and quiet.
I'm sorry. I'll leave.
I said shakily, then hurried back to the tent. Luckily, I hadn't unpacked anything yet, so I put my backpack on and started walking out of the campsite. As I did, the headlamp in the woods turned off. I got away and walked as far as I could, going another 3 miles to the next camp. I reported it as soon as I could as well, and unfortunately, it was just what I thought it was. The man that I had met was missing. There's almost no traces for them to follow, and out in the backcountry, it's nearly impossible to search for anyone. Who that person I saw out there was is likely the biggest unknown that could give us answers as to what happened, though it seems like most of us are aware of the most probable scenario that took place. Near the town I grew up in, there's a forest with a bunch of trails and camping spots. A couple years ago, I went back to visit my family for a week and decided to go camping while I was there. The gear I had was very basic, but I wasn't trying to do anything crazy. I just wanted to find a good spot and camp for a night or two. I started on a somewhat random trail and followed it for a while. I knew most of the trails led to a pond that was a few miles into the forest, so I was expecting to end up there. But as I got to mile 5 or 6, I realized it was going to somewhere else. I was actually excited to see where it led to, but after hours of walking, it almost seemed like it was an endless trail leading to nowhere. Eventually, my legs were starting to give out, so I found a small spot on the side of the trail to stake out for the night. It was just about dusk, so I was racing against the sun to get everything set up and to get a campfire going. I only had a few minutes to spare before the whole forest was dark. The campfire lit up a decent distance around, but not enough for me to go out any more than 15 to 20 feet from the camp. I stayed sitting and boiled some water, making tea to calm down for the night. It was hard to tell the time, but an hour probably passed, and it was well into the night already when I heard someone coming down the trail. I didn't think it was a person at first, like maybe a bear or something, but as they got closer, I could tell that it was definitely a person. I listened as they walked down the trail, and their figure became slightly visible in the light. I was just barely too far from the trail to be able to make out anything about them, though. All I could see is that it was a tall person with a backpack. They didn't stop or anything. They just walked along the trail and past my campsite. As the sound of their footsteps faded out, I thought it was pretty strange that they weren't carrying a flashlight and were hiking well into the night. From the small amount I could make out, though, having seen a large backpack, I assumed they knew what they were doing, and that's pretty much the last I thought about it. I stayed up by my campfire for another hour, then waited for it to burn out before getting in my tent and trying to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, though, having to pee. I tried to hold it in and go back to sleep, but I just couldn't get comfortable after having already woken up. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, walking a good 20 or so feet from my campsite. I did my business, then turned around to go back, but far out on the other side of my tent, I saw something move. The moonlight wasn't nearly enough for me to have gotten a clear sight of it, but something in me knew that it was a person. I slowly walked back to the tent with my eyes wide open, looking all around at the trees surrounding my camp. I then carefully reached in and grabbed my backpack, taking out a flashlight. I turned it on, and it immediately revealed a person standing by the trail. They were tall, looking just like the person I'd seen at the start of the night. Just as quick as I saw them, though, they ran off behind the trees and out of the light, and it was suddenly silent again. I probably sat there for a whole minute with the flashlight before realizing there was nothing I could do other than leave as soon as possible. I packed what I could, only leaving my cheap tent, then started walking toward the trail. Once I got to where I'd last seen them, I only got even more terrified because there were no signs of them anywhere. I didn't know if they were still watching me or even following me. I kept my flashlight on and walked on the trail, shining it all around at the trees as I cautiously made my way back. The sun started coming up halfway through, and I was able to make it back unharmed. When I got home, I looked up the exact trail I took, and from what I saw, it wasn't even an established trail. So maybe it was someone like me, just going on whatever path they saw. But that doesn't explain what happened. Why were they stalking my camp in the middle of the night? And how long were they there? I think that night was more likely than not supposed to be my last, and the outcome of me leaving when I did was probably the only outcome where I'd get to leave.